True paranormal stories can quite literally scare the crap out of you. True paranormal and supernatural encounters have no place in the real world. Or do they? These 19 true paranormal encounters will have you rethinking everything you know about the supernatural world. These encounters will have the most skeptic of skeptics scratching their head and pondering, maybe there really is something beyond our world. So, dim the lights, climb under your favorite blanket, and let's begin. Number 1. One time, I woke up hearing my sister's doll say, "Let's play." But I blew it off. I thought maybe my dog stepped on the doll's hand, and that's why I heard it. So I turned to my opposite side and awoke a few minutes later and saw a dark shadow at the foot of my bed. And when I tried to focus to see if it was my brother or my mom, my bed started shaking. I quite literally covered my head with my blanket and told my mom the next morning. She proceeded to place the holy water next to my bed, and it never happened again. Number 2. My husband's family has always told me about their house being haunted. I never, ever once believed any of it. I just wrote it off as them being superstitious. Well, a few months back, me, my husband, and my daughter spent the night at my in-laws. I slept in my sister-in-law's room with my daughter, and my husband and his sister ended up crashing on the couch in the living room watching TV. Late at night, I heard the door open, and I heard little puppy feet walking in and around the room. I felt my sister-in-law's puppy tug at the blanket, and I heard it scratch the bed trying to jump up. I pulled the blanket away and heard him leave. I then texted my husband to come and take the dog outside because I didn't want it to jump on the bed and get scared or have my daughter getting scared. I heard my husband walk back and forth down the hallway. He came back into the room to tell me it was already outside. I thought he was messing with me, so I rolled my eyes and fell back to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, he told me about turning off lights and finding them turned back on. I always believe there's a logical explanation for everything, but I just haven't found anything that makes more sense than the house ghost finally accepting me into the family enough to haunt me too. Number 3. My son was 3 at the time. We were walking through the flower garden in my city's historical park. It has this sort of flower maze, and throughout the walk I reminded my son to stay on the path so the flowers wouldn't get trampled on. He stopped dead in his tracks and asked in a very confused voice, "Then why is the man running through them into the woods?" When I asked him where the man was, he became very uncomfortable and begged me to carry him to the car so we could leave, and he refused to talk any more about what he had seen. He is now 11 and still gets uneasy when I bring it up or offer to go back to that particular part of the park. Number 4. When I was 8, me and my sibling played with a Ouija board, and when we tried to stop playing, a huge light bulb exploded over our heads. Number 5. I still remember this as clear as day. When I was 3, I got up in the middle of the night to sleep in my mom's room. As I crawled in next to her, I looked towards the foot of our bed. There stood the silhouettes of 2 grown men. One had glowing red eyes, and the other had glowing yellow eyes. Both just stood there and stared at me. I assumed I was seeing things, and I rubbed my eyes repeatedly, but they were still there. I begged my mom to wake up and look, but she kept her eyes closed and kept telling me it was just a dream. She remembers this too. She says at first she was just groggy and really thought I was dreaming, but after I kept waking her up, she realized how serious I was, and I was too afraid to look. Finally, in sheer terror, I got up and ran back to my bedroom. Years later, we looked it up. Apparently, these are commonly seen paranormal entities known as shadow people. Silhouettes with glowing red or yellow eyes. Still chills my mom and I to the bone. Number 6. When my boyfriend was a teenager, he went to a party across the street at one of his neighbors' houses. His parents and siblings stayed, but he headed home early to go to bed since he was so tired. He climbed into bed, door closed, lights off. But just when he was about to doze off, someone or something grabbed his ankles. He said he felt it clear as day, like it wasn't a light touch. Something grabbed him. So of course he jumped out of bed and turned the lights on, but no one was there. He thought maybe his brother or sister had come home to prank him, but he looked everywhere, under the bed, in the closet, the rest of the house, and couldn't find anyone hiding anywhere. And there was no way someone would have even had time to hide since he got up so quickly. He was so scared he ran across the street back to the party. He ended up sleeping in his parents' room that night. Number 7. Let me start by stating that I don't, and have never, and likely will never, believe in the supernatural in any way. If the following didn't convince me, I shudder to think what could. I was about 19, in college but living with my mom, and massively superstitious Hungarian grandmother. We all got along well, except for the occasional annoyances 3 adult women will eventually have when living together. Nothing major. We moved into a new place, an older house with lots of creaks and groans. We started jokingly referring to our new invisible housemate as Georgie, saying he didn't like having 3 sassy, headstrong, all up in his domicile. One evening, all 3 of us were just super cranky, snarking at each other over nothing. As it happens in most nonsensical arguments, my grandmother snapped off something at my mom that just hit her the wrong way. She shouted back, and I shouted at her not to talk to her mother that way. Ironic, I know. And things rapidly spiraled into screaming, tears. It was pretty bad. There was, in the center of our dining room table, an enormous plant and a huge ceramic pot. The table itself was super big, old, and solid. As the argument escalated, there was a sound like an explosion, and Georgie decided he had had enough caterwauling and chunked that big, heavy butt plant and pot right the crap off the table. I mean, 2.5 feet from the edge of that solid, sturdy wood table. It absolutely shattered into a bazillion tiny shards. There was no one anywhere near the table, and even if there was, there's no way we could have just bumped it or anything that could have jostled that 60-pound thing onto the ground. Number 8. One time I was lying in bed, and it was about 1 in the morning. I heard someone walking down the hallway right outside my room, and then my door started to creak open. I thought it was my stepfather, since he usually messes with me like that, and the door stopped after a couple of inches. Through the crack, I could see an eye staring right back at me. I shouted at him that I could see him, and I thought at that point he would give up messing with me. After that, the door slammed shut, and there was a loud footsteps down the hall, the opposite way of my parents' room. When I went out in the hall to see why he was acting so weird, I saw my parents' door was closed and my parents were dead asleep. When I asked about it in the morning, they checked the cameras that we kept in the hall, and the data from the night before was completely corrupted. Number 9. I went ghost hunting with my ex-boyfriend and 2 of his friends at the West Virginia State Prison last summer. We were on the solitary floor in the cell of one of the most brutal killers the prison held. My ex was holding a tape recorder, and I was holding an EMF detector, which only seemed to light up when I asked the questions. My friend asked the ghost, "Do you like the pretty girl who's asking you the questions?" And the EMF detector flashed bright red for a few seconds. After a few more minutes of questioning, we asked the spirit if it wanted us to leave. Once we left the cell, we replayed the tape recorder, and after the question about us leaving was posed, you could hear a faint, "Yeah, good night." Number 10. Our family made an annual tradition of attending a pre-Christmas event held at a local church. It was a cross between a craft fair and a garage sale. One section was dubbed the Nostalgia Room, where antiques were sold, and it was there that we bought a small, wall-hanging grandfather clock. This clock was haunted. My dad would forget to wind it, but it would still chime on the correct hour even when the hands and pendulum had stopped. Lights flickered at random times or turned on in the middle of the night while the switches remained in the off position. We moved out of state, unrelated to the spookiness, and brought the clock with us. The new house also had some minor strange occurrences. One night my sister and I were alone in the new house while my parents were out of state on business. We were watching a scary movie, and that dang clock chimed, effectively spooking us. We took it off the wall, into the garage, and smashed it into pieces with a hammer. Flash forward to hours later that night, when we were falling asleep, only to hear that now smashed clock chiming continuously from the garage. We opened the door and stared in horror at the pile of glass and gears as it continued to chime. We swept the mess into a garbage bag, drove to the nearest church, found the dumpster, and disposed of the haunted remains. I positively believe in the paranormal, and to this day, clocks still creep me out. Number 11. I grew up in rural Minnesota, and because we were teenagers and it's easier to trespass at night when you live in a small town and all your neighbors know you, my brother and cousins and I drove to an old barn when it was dark. My cousins were too scared, so they stayed in the car, but my brother and I, we went inside. I was standing near an old water trough, and I felt a hand on my shoulder. I said, "Ben, I told you not to try to scare me." And from away across the barn, I heard Ben say, "I wasn't." Out in the corner of my eye, I saw a white hand, clear as day, on my left shoulder. I started screaming, and we both ran back to the car and drove away as fast as we could. Number 12. My friends left for the weekend and gave me their dorm keys. They live in a different building than I did, one of the oldest buildings on campus, might I add, so I could take care of their cat. It was rainy, and I had my hood up and was looking down at the steps while walking up the building. As I was walking, I noticed to my right someone wearing a long white shirt. I thought it was weird, considering the rain and the wet brick, to be wearing something like that. but I nodded to her as I passed without looking up. When I got to the door, which was all glass paneling, I looked up and realized there was no one on the porch or the steps behind me. I turned around, and there was just an empty parking lot. It had been less than a minute since I nodded to her, and there was nowhere to hide and no other doors. She just vanished. Number 13. I have always been quite receptive to ghosts and spirits. I can sense their presence very well and even communicate with them on occasion. I trace this back to a very surreal experience when I was 4 or 5 years old. I lived in a house built in the early 1900s, and my room had 2 twin beds. I slept in one, and the other one was for guests. I had always slept in the same bed by the door, but one night I wanted to switch things up a little bit, and decided to sleep in the other bed. My parents woke me up the next morning to find my legs covered in blood. They searched my body for cuts or bites, and even searched the house for animals. They never figured out where the blood had come from. I never slept in that bed again. From that night on, for a few years, I had severe night terrors. Apparently, I screamed in my sleep with my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. My parents would rouse me, and I have no memory of what just happened. And from then on, I've had a connection to the paranormal world. Number 14. I used to be a nanny during the summer when I was in high school. The family lived in one of the oldest houses in the country. Now, this baby was a nanny's dream. He would ask to go to sleep, and he would never wake up in the middle of the night. One Saturday night, I had put the baby to bed and was watching TV downstairs. All of a sudden, I hear a blood-curdling scream coming from the baby monitor. I was so terrified I screamed and ran up to the nursery as fast as I could. I opened the door, and the baby was standing up in the crib, sobbing and pointing to the rocking chair in the corner. Needless to say, I was completely terrified. I grabbed the baby, and we spent the rest of the night downstairs. I explained what happened to his parents when they got home. And they were like, "Oh yeah, we're pretty sure the house is haunted. He, the baby, will point at things and say hi when no one is even there." Number 15. When I was still dating my husband, we visited his parents' house that was built next to the old family home from the early 1800s here in Sweden. I was walking by it one evening when I felt as if someone was watching me. I looked into the old abandoned house and saw this old woman looking at me from the second-story window. Her hair pulled back, angry eyes, dark dress and white apron, really short, and her eyes following me. I looked at her for like 2 seconds and then hurried back into the house and told everyone what I had seen. And they were like, "Oh yeah, that's Olga. She likes to keep tabs on things." They showed me a picture, and yep, that was her, the matriarch of the family, who the farm and the road was named after. My husband's dead great-great-great aunt. Number 16. My little sister had an imaginary friend growing up. We didn't think much of it. She would just talk to nothing and play by herself a lot. One day, my mom overheard her talking to her friend, and she kept calling it Free Me. Naturally, my mom asked her, "Honey, why did you call your friend Free Me?" To which my sister replied, "Because that's what she keeps saying to me. Free me! Free me!" Number 17. My friend and I were messing around with a Ouija board because we were bored, except she didn't want to touch it because she was really anxious about it. We contacted her dad, who I didn't know died until that day. I really didn't know anything about her dad, to be honest, except that his name was Steve. So we were asking him questions on the board, and my friend wanted to make sure it wasn't just me moving it. She asked what his birthday was, and I had no idea, but the planchette started moving, and she started freaking out because it was his birthday. Later on that night, we were using a ghost hunting app, which I thought was total BS, but we just thought it would be funny. Her boyfriend at the time kept calling her, and she was hitting ignore, and then the app said his name. We freaked out, of course, and then a few moments later it said, Father, which we took to mean that her dad was still around and he was trying to communicate with us. Number 18. When I was very young, I was taking piano lessons, and one night I had a dream that my piano teacher had had a heart attack while horseback riding. When I awoke the next morning, my mom sat me down. I told her all about my dream I had had the night before. She sat back in her chair, and she said, Sweetie, I just sat you down to tell you all this. And that's how I found out I'm clairvoyant. Number 19. When I was about 13 or 14, I fell really ill and had to undergo chemotherapy for 14 months overseas in Singapore. When I got better, I went back to my hometown in Indonesia, and I started experiencing weird crap. I shared a room and a bed with my sister since I used to be a scaredy cat and refused to sleep alone. My sister sleeps against the wall while I sleep on the other side of the bed. One night, I woke up to a slim hand holding my wrist. I thought it was my other sister, who sleeps upstairs, so I decided to let her hold my wrist. But then I realized a burning sensation and burn marks started to appear on my wrist. So I screamed. My sister woke up and saw nothing. The next day, we switched places, so I was the one sleeping against the wall. The same crap happened again, but this time, the hand appeared from the wall. Alright, my lovely lilies, thank you so much for watching the new video. If you can, hit that subscribe and like button, comment below and tell me your thoughts. Also, don't forget to tap the little notification bell so you're always in the know on this channel. As well, guys, you can always find me on Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and always you can hit me up in my emails. Feel free to send me your stories, whether they're fiction or totally true. I'm always up for some great stories. And oh, by the way, until next time, sweet dreams.